This video has been made possible in part due to the support of my Patreon patrons. If you like what I do and want to help support the future of the channel for as little as £1 or $1.50 a month, as well as see new videos early, get exclusive bonus content, and access to my Discord server, becoming a patron is the best way to do that. Link can be found down below. Now on to the gay space rocks. So for the second half of last year, I'd been really going through it. From working near non-stop on the Owl House video for months, only to then endure the most stressful 2 weeks of my life trying to upload it, to it all dawning on me that I'm really an adult now and just being generally despondent and feeling bad a lot of the time. Often when I get into these kinds of moods, I tend to escape to the media of my past, usually binge watching shows like Recess or Jimmy Neutron or other things. However, this time around, I decided to revisit something a little more contemporary.
We are the Crystal Gems.
That's right, we're talking about Steven Universe, the Cartoon Network series that ran from November 2013 until January of 2019 and followed a team of rock-based aliens named the Crystal Gems as they worked to protect humanity from interstellar threats, while the youngest member Steven learns how to use his powers as the first ever human-gem hybrid. Over its 5-season run, the show would break numerous boundaries in terms of queer representation, and through its deep themes and intense character exploration, would grow into one of the most beloved cartoons of the decade at the time. Because towards the end of its run, Steven Universe became the target of a vicious hate campaign that, despite being mostly nothing more than thinly veiled bigotry cultivated for the sole purpose of destroying one of the few shows willing to stand up for marginalised people, they were very successful in largely swaying the conversation surrounding the show, spreading misinformation about its production and vilifying the crew behind it. While I will be touching upon that aspect of the show's legacy here and there, this isn't a discussion focused on that, because around here, I like talking about things I like, and as you can discern, I do like Steven Universe. Very much so, in fact. And now that the series has passed its 10-year anniversary, I wanted to reflect on all the good the show was able to achieve and what it personally means to me. So grab a cookie cat, tune your ukulele, and brace yourselves as I talk about how Steven Universe celebrates imperfection. One thing before we get into this, most of the information about the show and its production I'll be bringing up stem from the 2 art books released during its run written by Chris McDonnell, Steven Universe Art and Origins, and Steven Universe End of an Era. Of which I only own the first one physically because I'm not paying £200 for a book that's barely 3 years old, no matter how much I love the show. This is just to tell you that if by some miracle you can find these books for a reasonable price, you should definitely pick them up. And also to show you, unlike a lot of people who talk about this show, I've actually done my research, because Steven Universe was really my wake-up call to how misinformed and ignorant people can be about the production of an animated series. With all that out of the way, we can finally get started. Growing up, Rebecca Sugar's fondest memories were those of their family's summer trips to the beaches of Delaware, where they became fascinated with beachside towns and the communities that lived there. This was married by a deep appreciation for the animation process and the people behind the drawings, which was inherited from their father, whereas their mother was a modern dancer, further fueling Rebecca's passion for the creative industries. While in high school, they and their brother Steven set their sights on creating indie comics, which would only grow more intense with the passing years when they entered college, as they met other artists and began attending conventions. While this was going on, Rebecca's artistic process was starting to develop and grow in rather big ways, where projects became about challenging themselves as a writer and using their work to unpack difficult feelings in a way they found cathartic, while also strengthening their abilities, all of which would become instrumental in their later work. Rebecca soon found themselves studying at the School of Visual Arts in New York, where they met other students such as Ian Jones-Quartey, Danny Hines, Kat Morris, and Paul Vallejo, who helped rekindle their at the time waning passion for animation. During a panel hosted at the school, Rebecca became acquainted with Phil Reidner, who talked about his work as a character and prop designer on a new Cartoon Network series titled Adventure Time, a show that would soon take the world by storm and revolutionize the landscape of TV animation. When Adventure Time was looking for new staff members, Phil recommended Rebecca, who was quickly hired as a story revisionist, though they wouldn't hold that position for long, as their work quickly impressed the show's creator Pendleton Ward, and thus they were promoted to the position of storyboard artist.
When I did my first storyboard for Adventure Time, it came from the Nightosphere. Penn gave me the option to write a song for the episode. I'd never written a song professionally before, just as a hobby. I wrote a song for the episode that started out really bombastic and flashy, and Penn encouraged me to tear it down and make it this small, personal thing and moment.
Rebecca worked on Adventure Time over the show's first 5 seasons, and during that time, they became an instrumental figure in the evolution of the show, as what started out as a wacky improvisational series about wannabe heroes that was hinted to take place in a post-apocalyptic future, became a complex tapestry of tragic backstories that forced its characters to ponder the bigger questions of the universe. And nowhere in the show was Rebecca's influence felt more than in the evolution of the character Marceline the Vampire Queen. Introduced in Season 1 as a minor reoccurring character who enjoyed playing pranks on our main duo, Rebecca instilled her with so much pathos and depth, turning her into one of the show's most important and layered characters. This transformed Adventure Time as a whole from a surprisingly funny pop culture fad into a generation-defining show that still continues in some form to this very day. So in 2011, when Cartoon Network was in the market for new shows, they ended up approaching Rebecca to pitch something. At the time, Rebecca hadn't really thought about creating their own show and didn't have any concrete ideas until they thought back on everything that led them to this point. Their experience on Adventure Time, the friends they made in college, those trips to beach towns as a kid, and working with their brother on indie comics back in high school. Around then, Rebecca had begun collaborating with Genndy Tartakovsky, one of the defining creators behind early Cartoon Network, who had become an admirer of Rebecca's art during his final years at the studio when he saw some sketches of Marceline, to a point that when he was struggling with production on his film Hotel Transylvania over at Sony Animation, he asked for their help. That same time, Rebecca was getting ready to pitch their show, which Genndy became one of the first people to see, essentially mentoring Rebecca when it came to pitching a series, which proved to be quite successful as the idea was soon picked up for a pilot. The initial concept revolved around the human brother to a trio of magical girl heroes who live in a coastal city built on the ruins of a fantasy kingdom, where the team must defend the citizens from ancient evil. However, for a pilot with potential to be turned into a full series, Rebecca also had the task of fleshing out this world and characters, while also allowing some room for future writers to contribute their own ideas, just as they had been able to on Adventure Time. Almost as if by fate, while Rebecca began the process of staffing for the future, many of their friendships over the past few years found their way onto the show, such as one day where Cartoon Network brought in writers Ben Levin and Matt Burnett, not knowing Rebecca and Ben already knew each other. With this skeleton crew assembled, they began refining the style and concepts, working on the same floor of the studio as the team of Powerpuff Girls Dance Pants, a CGI reunion special. And Steven Sugar, now the show's background designer, made fast friends, bringing on board colorists as well as the show's first art director, Kevin Dart. The mission statement in finding a visual language for the series, a combination of Disney 70s anime and Hanna-Barbera, was to create an action comedy that was beautiful, and the fact it was so stunning is what made it cool. And through looking at the development drawings, you can clearly see a timeline of the show starting to take shape and solidifying its style. This process lasted long after the completion of the pilot and greenlight for a full series, which generated some fear surrounding how drastically different the series now looked. These feelings weren't helped when Cartoon Network uploaded the pilot in May of 2013 to drum up hype for the official premiere, without informing Rebecca or the crew. And when the new refined look was revealed, their worries were entirely founded, as of course there was a backlash, with people even calling Rebecca a sellout. Composers Ivy and Sarashu were chosen to craft the musical soundscape of the series, though like everything else, this too would be done in a rather unconventional manner. Rather than having a single motif that defines the characters, Steven Universe gives each of its characters their own individual sound palette, with instruments that reflect their personality, helping the music feel more alive and organic, better connecting to the nature of humanity which is at the core of the series. Through this building of an extraordinary creative team of many disciplines and backgrounds, the aim was to cultivate a collaborative and respectful environment where everyone's ideas and experiences were treated with equal value. Because only through giving each person on the creative team a voice would the show achieve its goal of creating a story that encapsulates everything about what it means to be human. But now that they knew what the show needed to be, had laid a foundation for its art direction and music, and were starting to figure out who these characters were, the next step was to actually make the show. Before we can start digging into the series proper and analysing its 160 episodes worth of stories, we need to answer an important question. What is Steven Universe about? Because to a lot of people, it's about a band of alien rebels fighting an interstellar war to overthrow a repressive government, and that's not necessarily a wrong impression. All that stuff is in the show, though I find it to be an oversimplification that leads to many ignoring the forest for the trees, because the meaning of Steven Universe is easily found in its most famous song.
If I could begin to be half of what you think of me.
Love Like You was the series' end credits theme that Rebecca Sugar wrote over the first few years of production. Starting with the intention of writing this surreal yet literal song from the point of view of an alien being fascinated by a human's ability to love, Rebecca soon found the song move from those confines and grow into a defining anthem for the show that can be related to any of its characters and their relationships. As it exists now, Love Like You is a song about the difficulties of simply being present with and loving other people, which can drastically impact the ways that you perceive yourself. Steven Universe is the story of all these characters whose lives are coloured by grief and deep-seated insecurities about their own self-worth, and how through being open with others, they learn how to love themselves. And this narrative thread connects every single character, no matter how important they are in the grand scheme of things. When we first meet Steven, he has only just started to be introduced to the responsibility of being a crystal gem, so is very eager, though inexperienced. He is trying his best to handle things like an adult by wanting to be tough and helpful, though still being a naive and goofy kid at heart, which often leads to him messing up and being, as Pearl puts it, sweet but occasionally obnoxious. Though in that, there is this optimistic purity to the character where Steven lacks the ability to pass prejudgment of others, fully accepting anyone, which allows him a different perspective than the other gems, often coming up with out-of-the-box solutions to problems that no one else but him could have thought of. Season 1 is concerned with Steven slowly understanding more about the gems, learning how to use his own powers, and unpacking the difficult feelings over the absence of his late mother, Rose Quartz, the beloved and idolised leader of the Crystal Gems who gave up her physical form in order to create Steven after falling in love with his dad Greg, leaving behind a weighty legacy which Steven fears he'll forever be in the shadow of as he tries to live up to these impossible standards. And as the show progresses, so does the dynamic between Steven and the gems, which becomes far more complex. The more Steven matures over time, the more he comes to understand his guardians' vulnerabilities and how they don't really have it all together either. And nevertheless, Steven fully accepts them and all their flaws without hesitation, and in doing so, he is somewhat allowed to accept his own. Season 1, episode 38, The Test, written by Hilary Florido and Kate Mitroff, is a follow-up story to an earlier entry, Cheeseburger Backpack, recontextualizing previous events to show a distinction between who Steven was at the start of the show and who he is now, while also setting up the trajectory of his arc over the rest of the series. When he learns his first ever gem mission was not only a test, but one that, from his point of view, he failed, Steven demands a do-over in order to prove himself. So the gems construct a gauntlet of challenges, which Steven does well at until a mistake reveals to him that this too is all fake. Everything in this test is rigged to ensure he can't fail or get hurt, which frustrates him until he ends up out of bounds and overhears a conversation between the gems.
We're bad at this.
What? Yeah, you can't control him, and he shouldn't be taking advice from me, and we don't have Rose to tell us what to do!
But he needs us to show him how to be a gem.
Steven is not just a gem. There has never been anything or anyone like Steven. We don't know what he needs.
Here, Steven is faced with the reality that his caretakers, the people he looks to for advice and wants respect from, are just as, if not more, insecure and lost than him. So Steven makes a choice. he puts his own feelings aside for the sake of his loved ones, which is what I feel the real test of this episode was. It was a test of Steven's maturity and growth since his first mission, and how much more emotionally intelligent he has become. However, this is also a double-edged sword, as from here we witness Steven continuously disregard his own wants and feelings for the sake of others, which while selflessness and empathy are a good thing, when taken to their utmost extreme, they can leave a negative impact on a person's mental health, which will become clear by the end of the show. Though now that Steven has come to understand the gems for all their flaws and has started to gain an insight into their insecurities, he starts putting progressively more energy towards helping his family work through their various emotional scars. And I feel the order in which the show deals with Garnet, Amethyst, and Pearl's issues directly correlates to where Steven is in his emotional maturity, while also drawing attention to how each of the gems represent a type of relationship one might have with an older sibling. Starting with Pearl. Pearl is organized, particular about everything, and at times can be kind of a control freak, always wanting things done her way and getting frustrated when she isn't listened to. As Rose's most loyal and trusted confidant, she feels directly responsible for any team failures and is struggling more than anyone when it comes to adjusting to this new life without their leader. All these traits have manifested into a fierce, overprotective attitude towards Steven, mostly because Pearl of course loves him, but also feels taking care of him is her continuing to fulfill her duties to Rose, and also due to her perception of humans as helpless, fragile creatures. Though despite Pearl's often lack of faith in Steven's abilities early in the show, she is also the one who praises and celebrates him for his successes. Pearl's continuing grief over her unresolved feelings for Rose are hinted at over season 1 until we hit episode 45, Rose's Scabbard, written by Raven Mollisey, Paul Vallejo, and Rebecca Sugar. Over the past few episodes, Steven has been learning new things about his mother due to his magical pet lion, some of which Pearl wasn't even aware of, which is startling information as she believed Rose kept no secrets from her. In a beautiful scene written by Rebecca Sugar, Pearl returns to the Strawberry Battlefield, one of the major battlegrounds of the war, and Steven gives chase wanting to find a way to fix it, believing he's done something wrong. Once he catches up to Pearl, she opens up about how lost she feels without Rose and doesn't know who she is anymore.
Sometimes I wonder if she can see me through your eyes. What would she think of me now?
Well, I think you're pretty great.
Steven is the only one who could have helped Pearl through this moment because at this point he knows very little about her history and feelings when it comes to Rose. His relentless innocence and unwavering compassion is what she needs to reground her and is the catalyst for Pearl's journey of building her self-worth, with others helping her understand she is the master of her own destiny. On the flip side, we have Amethyst, who is the gem most comfortable with human culture, including a love of practical jokes and food, despite it not being something gems need. Personality-wise, Amethyst is reckless, abrasive, and fun-loving, being the most outwardly compassionate of the trio in terms of her relationship with Steven. Amethyst's big issues are first brought up in On the Run, written by Joe Johnston and Jeff Liu. In the episode, Steven and Amethyst run away from home, with the former doing so to emulate characters in a book, and the latter for different reasons. Amethyst brings Steven to the Prime Kindergarten, the place she was made, as she did not come from Homeworld like the others. A kindergarten is a place that uses a planet's resources to form new gems, killing all life in the process and leaving behind a desolate wasteland. The way she was created and the manner in which Garnet and Pearl talk about it have left Amethyst with a deep self-hatred, feeling she was a mistake, which gets escalated when Pearl finds them and scolds Amethyst for bringing Steven here, leading to a fight between them.
I never asked for it to be this way. I never asked to be made.
Once the dust has settled, they discover Amethyst hiding in her original hole. Though at this point, Steven lacks the context or emotional maturity to be of much help, with his solution being telling Pearl to talk to her, which is what was needed in that moment, though demonstrates Steven doesn't quite understand what Amethyst is dealing with, only wanting a way to stop his family from fighting. This has changed drastically by the time we get to Amethyst's main arc in Season 3, where now Steven has grown to a point where he can better understand and relate to her. In Season 3, Episode 18, Crack the Whip, when Amethyst says to Steven and Connie their training won't matter in a real fight, they take a break and goof off around town until Jasper later finds them and wipes the floor with Amethyst, laying into her both physically and emotionally.
Are you that desperate for troops, Rose? That you keep a defect like this?
Rose said, I'm perfect the way I am.
Then she had low standards.
Amethyst gets poofed, leading to Steven and Connie fusing to fight Jasper off and save her. Though when Amethyst reforms and sees what just happened, it causes her to start believing she has become the weakest of the team now that Steven has gotten so much stronger. And those feelings of inadequacy are strengthened in the following episode, Steven vs. Amethyst, written by Hilary Florido and Jessie Zhu, where Amethyst makes the decision to start training with Steven only for him to surpass her.
You're supposed to be the rookie, but now you're better than me at everything. Now I'm the worst crystal gem.
What?
Steven argues he is way worse than Amethyst, thus they decide to fight in order to prove who is the worst crystal gem. And this fight scene, bordered by Hilary Florido, is such a cool sequence, both in the creative ways Steven and Amethyst use their powers, and the fact the entire time they don't stop trying to one-up each other over how much they can insult themselves. By the end, the two become so exhausted they fall to the floor and finally open up to each other.
Can't even be the one thing I'm supposed to be, you know?
Of course I do. I'm not Rose Quartz.
This is so incredibly important because Amethyst is the only character Steven is honest with about the pressure he feels when it comes to living up to his mother's legacy, and it further strengthens their relationship, which is cemented a few episodes later in Earthlings, written by Raven Mollisey and Paul Vallejo. When Steven and Amethyst encounter Jasper again and Amethyst gets a chance to rematch, she rejects Steven's help. However, despite her improvement, she still isn't able to take her down, believing no matter what, she'll never win because Jasper was made right and she was made wrong.
Stop trying to be like Jasper. You're nothing like Jasper. You're like me! Because we're both not like anybody!
I could spend possibly a whole hour talking about the special bond between Steven and Amethyst as gems made on Earth, and how they continue to evolve over the series, with them both gaining a deeper understanding of each other and their baggage, culminating in the incredible Season 5 episode What's Your Problem, but I feel it's time we move on. Garnet at the beginning is the stoic and level-headed de facto leader of the Crystal Gems. She is often reserved and will only speak if she has a point to make, and when she does, it will be the final word of the conversation. Except when it comes to Steven, whom she is very warm and loving towards, always ensuring that his thoughts and opinions are validated and that he is treated as an equal to the rest of the team. Whereas Pearl is overprotective of Steven and Amethyst is very much about letting him learn things on his own, Garnet provides a much essential middle ground, giving Steven independence and room to grow, though also knowing when to step in if he really needs help. Because of this role Garnet plays in Steven's life, she is the last of the gems he is able to help in any meaningful way, because that could only happen once he had matured enough to understand the true severity of the situation. So at the end of Season 4, Steven gives himself up to Homeworld in order to stop some of his human friends from being abducted, and after some definitely not traumatizing adventures in a hostile environment, Steven finds a way home and now must deal with the fallout of his decision, leading to one of my favourite episodes that does not get nearly enough attention, Pool Hopping, written and storyboarded by Katie Mitroff, Paul Vallejo and Joe Johnston. Steven is dealing with all the change that is happening around him and finding his place amongst it all, which is when he runs into Garnet, who is working at the town's donut store.
Have we fallen on hard times?
Oh, Steven, this isn't about making ends meet. This is about being random.
It is established very early in the show that Garnet has future vision, but not in a sense where she knows exactly what is going to happen. She can view multiple branching timelines at once and see various outcomes, which helps her make the right decision. Though she is still fallible, thus she decides to explore the most unlikely possibilities she can't detect, ending up in the most improbable reality.
Oh, so you want to do stuff you usually don't just to see what happens?
I didn't foresee you understanding that.
So she and Steven spend the day being spontaneous and unexpected, leading to them chasing a kitten into the woods where they find a whole bunch of them. Steven decides to put the randomness on hold, but Garnet becomes easily overwhelmed, causing her to break down. She admits why she's really been doing this, because Steven lately had been making so many decisions that she couldn't foresee.
I thought, if I could use my future vision to jump into improbable futures, I could get out ahead of the next big unexpected change. But I don't know what I'm doing here. I can't tell what's probable anymore. Anything could happen. Anything could happen to these cats.
Steven comforts her by advising that rather than focusing on a bunch of different things that could happen, they simply focus and work towards the thing they want to happen. So they get the cats out of the rain and take care of them, which in seeing Steven take charge of the situation, Garnet is able to understand why things have felt different lately.
I've been looking into probable futures where you act like a child. I keep expecting you to run from responsibility and to turn to me for help, but you don't do that anymore.
Then there's how Steven's ideology is developed and challenged over the course of the show, where from the first episode we are shown this child who has obtained a lot of his morals and perception of the world from TV and video games. So a lot of season 1 becomes about breaking the fantasy of what Steven thinks are fun adventures with his magical guardians. He wants to be a physically strong traditional hero who fights bad guys just like in the stories he consumes, only to recognise that reality is far more complex than that, which is kickstarted by the introduction of Lapis Lazuli when Steven frees her from the mirror she's trapped in, his first real act of disobedience against his caretakers. Lapis is the first gem Steven properly meets besides Garnet, Amethyst and Pearl, and is essentially a gateway to learning about Homeworld and how important Steven's missions really are. In trying to flee from the Earth, Lapis steals the ocean and forms a tower to the stars, causing Steven and the gems to go after her, leading to a sobering revelation.
Oh, how do I put this? All gems aren't necessarily good.
All those monsters we fight used to be just like us, right, Pearl?
Yes, but they've become corrupted and broken. We have to take care of them, subdue them, contain them. It's the best we can do for them for now.
The gems try fighting Lapis to no avail until Steven has enough and wants to talk to her. In a previous episode, Steven discovers he has healing powers, which he uses to fix Lapis's gem and save the planet, becoming a hero not through brute force, but through compassion and understanding. Though he is still mostly in the dark when it comes to the dangers outside his world, which doesn't last long because soon the team discover a gem called Peridot is sending machines to Earth which they keep destroying. Then Lapis sends them a message warning them about some gems on their way to Earth, leading into the season finale, The Return and Jailbreak. The gems face off against Jasper and Peridot, only to be defeated and taken prisoner on board their ship. Though due to being half human, gem technology has a limited effect on Steven, allowing him to free everyone until he finds Lapis.
Steven, whatever you're doing, just stop. If we do everything they say, they might go easy on us.
But they're mean. They hurt my friends. They hurt my face. They've got you here in prison.
That's why we can't fight them.
That's why we have to fight them.
This is a moment that for the rest of the show's run, people would point to as evidence that Steven's personality drastically changed from season 1 to season 3, where he solves his problems by emotionally connecting with others to inspire change in them. What people miss is the context season 2 gives us and how that informs Steven's choices moving forward. After escaping the ship and crashing it back into Earth, season 2 follows Steven fully grasping the weight of responsibility that is on his shoulders, and through that we see a progression of Steven starting to believe he is the problem and questioning just who he is exactly, especially with him being the first and only gem-human hybrid in existence.
And then I found out that the gems are alien rebels and that there are other gems out in space that want us dead because they think we're traitors. And they tried to take me hostage because they think I'm my mom.
and maybe I kinda am? I wish I could talk to Garnet, Amethyst, and Pearl about it, but I think they kinda blame me for my mom not being around.
However, the significant change in Steven comes when the gems finally capture Peridot, who spends a lot of Season 2 running around the Earth trying to find a way home. However, just before she's caught, she seems scared and keeps alluding to something disastrous that's about to happen, causing Steven to release her and the pair forming a friendship where she informs Steven of what she's been terrified over. At the center of the Earth is a cluster of gem shards forcibly fused together, and when it emerges, it will tear apart the planet from the inside. So Peridot forms a truce with the crystal gems to build a drill that can stop it before that happens. And Peridot's reformation on Earth is the key to Steven's empathy becoming more prominent. Let's go back to that clip from the Season 1 finale.
But they're mean. They hurt my friends. They hurt my face. They've got you here in prison.
That's why we can't fight them.
That's why we have to fight them.
Steven was talking about Peridot, the gem who is now helping them, because he learns that the reason Peridot was like that is because she had never been taught anything else or offered a different perspective. Through his time with Peridot, Steven learns to stop seeing good and evil as these absolutes and understand people are a product of their circumstances. And if a gem who a few weeks ago was trying to destroy them can see the beauty of Earth and change, why can't other gems? Steven's ultimate power is his humanity, the ability to learn as he grows, and he recognizes through Garnet, Amethyst, Pearl, Lapis, and Peridot that gems are fully capable of that too if given the chance. Steven is not regressing or swapping one ideology for another. He still fights when he has to, but has also witnessed how a little compassion can turn the tide. And that is crucial in the conclusion to the cluster arc, one of Steven's most defining moments. While he and Peridot are drilling down to destroy the cluster, Steven starts to feel intense pain until he connects with all the various gem shards telepathically and realizes they don't want to destroy the Earth, but can't stop themselves from forming. Steven tries to bubble the gems, but there's too many, until they all start bubbling each other.
I've got you. You've got this. We've all got each other!
What to a lot of people was an underwhelming resolution to a multi-episode story arc is a beautiful example of Steven's personal growth and emotional maturity that reinforces how his worldview has changed since the end of Season 1. Though Steven becomes assured in his ideals and his powers are getting stronger, his sense of self continues slipping as he can't escape the shadow of Rose Quartz's legacy, all preceding the dramatic reveal that Rose Quartz shattered Pink Diamond. And if Steven was struggling with his identity before, Season 4 just continuously kicks him while he's down. For instance, we witness him starting to believe Rose created him for some kind of magical destiny or greater purpose, and searching for deeper answers about his existence that simply aren't there. On top of that, he's also dealing with guilt over people he wasn't able to help, is getting tired of no one being able to give him clear answers, and almost has his dad taken away by Blue Diamond, causing the gems to journey into space to rescue him, where we receive a chilling reminder that despite everything that has happened over this show, Steven is still merely a child dealing with all this.
Dad! Dad! I want my dad! I just want my dad.
Though through it all, Steven, despite helping others with their problems, still won't be honest about his feelings with anyone, keeping a lot of these emotions bottled up and refusing to be present with his loved ones, which will reach a breaking point by the end of Season 5, and we'll discuss that a little bit later down the road. For now, let's move on and look at how Steven Universe handles its representation. It is impossible to separate Steven Universe from the impact it has had on LGBTQIA+ representation in all ages programming, especially in how it presents these themes and relationships by treating them as a typical part of life, letting these characters exist exactly as they are. While in many cases queer narratives are intrinsically tied to a character's arc, the show finds a clear balance between highlighting these aspects while also giving them room to breathe so the characters don't become defined by them. Garnet is the physical manifestation of the love between Ruby and Sapphire, which is a core aspect of her identity, but she's also a strong leader, a comedic mastermind, and a deeply loving person. Pearl's unrequited love for Rose has left her with some deep emotional scars, but that's only part of her. The reason the representation in Steven Universe feels so authentic is because of the way the crew went about the creation and writing of this world, where each person's unique lived experience had a home in this show, with them making something that reflected who they were. And the way Steven Universe explores these questions about gender and identity is best exemplified by the fantasy concept of fusion, where two or more characters combine into a singular new form that represents their relationship while also being their own separate character. And now to Steven Universe's, I'm just gonna say it, weirdest critics, they saw fusion as purely a metaphor for sex, which is so clearly just another example of bigots trying to dehumanize queer people by boiling down their relationships to purely physical. Because while some fusions are a representation of romance, the concept is a vehicle used to explore all kinds of relationships, including platonic, familial, or even toxic. When Steven and Connie fuse into Stevonnie in the fan favourite Alone Together, written by Hilary Florido, Katie Mitroff, and Rebecca Sugar, they explore the confusion and jubilation in discovering this new identity as per Garnet's encouragement.
Listen to me. You are not two people, and you are not one person. You are an experience. Make sure you're a good experience. Now, go have fun!
And in that episode, Stevonnie is used to demonstrate the reality of puberty and the idea that as your body starts changing, people will start to view you differently, which is a strange and terrifying thought because you're still just you. Stevonnie decides to attend a party only to experience a panic attack, which is interrupted by Kevin, who invades their personal space and pressures them into dancing. From their experiences and struggles in this episode, a lot of non-binary folks saw parts of themselves and their own story represented by Stevonnie, since when a person discovers that new aspect of their identity, while it's incredibly exciting, it can also be very vulnerable, as at times you can almost feel like two different people. The identity you've been pressured into living your entire life, and your newly discovered authentic self that you're still figuring out. While Stevonnie is not an outright depiction of these themes, the feelings are the same, and it was the first time a lot of people got to see their own experiences portrayed in the mainstream media, and this sort of thing is seen throughout the series. Another notable example being how certain gems continuously refer to Steven as Rose or Pink Diamond and use she/her pronouns, while he tries to argue that he is who he is. That will resonate heavily with trans viewers. And later Stevonnie appearances lean into this aspect further, with their androgyny being further emphasized and confirming they did in fact identify as intersex and non-binary in the Dove Self-Esteem project, which was shorts created by the crew featuring the characters talking about self-care and body positivity. And when you have a story about alien rebels created by a diverse crew encompassing many marginalized identities, you end up with a cartoon that features people who have been oppressed by their government or peers embarking on an emotional journey where they learn to accept and love themselves while also demanding respect from others, which is a very empowering and validating thing for the many people out there who are going through something similar. People who grew up exclusively on stories that were never made with them in mind, which left them feeling alone or that they were the problem.
I think Steven Universe has reached a lot of people who have felt passed over by other media. They connect with Steven Universe on a level that they've been unable to with other shows.
Though, of course, I can't talk about Steven Universe's queer rep without mentioning how passionately and tirelessly the crew had to fight to get any of this on our screens. The masterpiece of an episode that was The Answer, which showcased Ruby and Sapphire's romantic fairy tale origin story, was adapted into a gorgeously illustrated picture book with art by Ellie Michalka and Tiffany Ford in 2016. This was actually the moment when executives at Cartoon Network really caught on to the representation of Steven Universe, which, I mean, I think they were a little late to the party on that front. Rebecca was pulled into a meeting where executives demanded they explain themselves because they had already been told to tone down the overtly romantic overtones of Ruby and Sapphire's relationship, and now it was a children's book. To which Rebecca had to strongly defend the unfortunately controversial fact that queer kids do exist and deserve to see themselves in TV and books like any other kids. The strength of Ruby and Sapphire's relationship was tested towards the end of the original series with the Heart of the Crystal Gems arc, where we see how the team reacts to the fallout of learning Rose was actually Pink Diamond and faked her shattering, something only Pearl knew but had been sworn to secrecy over. Since Ruby and Sapphire saw Rose as the reason they were together, telling them not to question themselves or anything, it has them second guessing if their relationship was also built on a lie, causing the two of them to separate so they can figure things out on their own. The point of this storyline was to explore the idea of differentiation between individuals in a committed relationship, where continuing to work on oneself outside of their partner's influence will lead to the relationship becoming stronger, as neither person will end up losing themselves to each other. And that is what the episode The Question, written by Mickey Brewster and Jeff Liu, is all about. Ruby realizing that she has never really taken the time to figure out who she is as an individual.
Back when I emerged, the first thing I did was get crammed together with a bunch of other rubies. Then, I was with Sapphire all the time. I was always checking in on someone.
Thus, Ruby decides to become a cowboy and venture out into the wilderness on a journey of self-discovery and emotional growth all by herself, with Steve and Amethyst and Greg. Through it though, Ruby realizes their love is 100% genuine and how much she misses Sapphire but doesn't want things to be like how they were before. They return home as Ruby dramatically confronts Sapphire on the beach until she gets down on one knee and proposes.
This way we could be together even when we're apart. This time, being Garnet will be our decision. What do you say? Of course.
The wedding of Ruby and Sapphire was something the crew had planned for years, but they also knew it would take a lot of time and work to make it a reality.
Initially, when we introduced Ruby and Sapphire in Jailbreak, we were told that they could not be in a romantic relationship. I was told by Cartoon Network standards and practices that they could not kiss on the mouth. When I was asked internally by my executive at the time if they were a couple, I said, absolutely. Yes, of course. They sing an entire song about how they're in love. I wanted them to be an absolutely iconic cartoon couple.
However, the issues of depicting Ruby and Sapphire as the crew intended were not purely because of executive pushback. Cartoon Network is broadcasted worldwide and relies heavily on international funding for their shows, which means creating shows that can be played in as many territories as possible. So while Rebecca and the crew were making leaps and bounds in terms of queer representation, they were also walking on eggshells, as they were being held to the standards of the most conservative countries in the world, and if they didn't adhere to those strict guidelines, the show would lose that international support and would no longer have the funding to continue. So if they were going to have their sapphic space rock wedding, they were going to have to play the long game. Initially, the concept of the wedding was pitched back in 2015 as a single episode tentatively titled If You Love Yourself So Much, about Garnet marrying herself, which the network predictably objected to unless they severely toned down the romantic aspect, which by this point Rebecca had grown tired of, thus they decided to shelve the concept for the time being. When the time finally came for the crew to attempt this storyline again, they put in the work to ensure they covered all their bases, because rather than addressing their own feelings about the non-heteronormative, executives would often dance around it by asking questions like if this will appeal to their audience. Though after a few years of dealing with this, Rebecca had come prepared, essentially backing the executives into a corner until they either had to accept the story or reveal the true reason they were so opposed, with executives going so far as having the gall to say Steven wouldn't be interested in a wedding, despite the fact his love for all that stuff has been well documented since season 1.
I wouldn't bend on the story, and every time there was a concern about it not being entertaining enough, I would add more. A big musical number, a huge fight, a half-hour special. This thing will be so entertaining it'll blow kids' hair back.
After many meetings and debates, the executives relented and told the crew they could proceed with the wedding, though it would likely mean the end of the show since they would be pulled in many countries. Shortly after, the crew were told they would not be receiving another season order. Thus, Rebecca had to campaign for an additional 6 episodes to add on to the end of season 5 that would allow them to conclude the story. And to many, said conclusion was rushed and meant a lot of things the show had been building never received substantial payoff. And while I do somewhat agree, there is no part of me that questions whether or not the crew did the right thing here. Essentially, Rebecca had an insanely difficult choice to make. They could either not do the wedding and the show continues for 1 or 2 more seasons, giving them more time to flesh out an ending, or they could risk it all in order to say what they wanted to with their art. To many, Steven Universe represents this idea of simply existing and being able to express yourself without fear, which unfortunately is a dream for a lot of people. It's about being authentic to yourself and what you want out of life, with Garnet's wedding encompassing all of that, becoming a landmark moment in the history of queer representation that finally broke through so many of those barriers that had been stopping queer people for decades. Look at any interview for a prominently LGBTQIA+ inclusive animated show that came out after Steven, like She-Ra and the Princesses of Power, and read an interview with the creator and they'll tell you how instrumental Steven Universe was in them finally getting to tell their stories. Queer people were no longer hidden in subtext, lazy stereotypes, or background scenery. They were the heroes of the story and romantic interests. So while I would have loved for the original run of Steven Universe to continue for a few more years, I would not trade this moment for anything in the world. This unapologetic and honest exploration of queer themes and stories through a lens anyone would be able to understand has the power to change lives. And I know this because it changed mine. I was 12 when Steven Universe premiered, and my knowledge or experience of LGBTQIA+ people was practically non-existent, consisting mostly of camp stereotypes and harmful coding that was in nearly every piece of media growing up, as well as all the other kids calling me gay as an insult. I knew there were people out there that were gay, but that was as much as anyone was willing to admit. And that was pretty miserable for me because I did have a lot of questions, especially since I had never really been able to fit in with the picture of masculinity society wanted me to be. I didn't like sports, I just wanted to sing. When I was little, I loved playing dolls and dressing up with my sister, and I always found making friends with girls infinitely easier than boys. But I never let myself talk about, or even think about, what that meant in terms of who I was. Then I began watching Steven Universe, and it really opened my eyes. I saw a world in which a boy wearing a dress wasn't a joke, it was something celebrated. Characters who demonstrated that romantic love is genderless, and that everyone should be able to live freely as their authentic selves. For the first time, I was shown that you don't have to fit into those strict gender binaries or force yourself to be what everyone expects you to be. Because at the end of the day, you are an experience, and the only thing you have to do is make sure it's a good experience. And now, this is the section that is likely going to be the most contentious, because here is where I'm going to break down a lot of the major criticisms surrounding the show and explain why I greatly disagree. But I mean, at the end of the day, these are still just my personal views. I know the title of this section sounds a little condescending, but when you choose to name everything after a song from the show, you take the hand you're dealt with. And we are going to get the big one out of the way first thing, because it has the least to do with the show's content and is more about the conversation surrounding it. However, it reflects a wider issue in terms of online animation discussion that really needs to be addressed, and Steven Universe pretty much overnight became the poster child for the spread of misinformation of how an animated production works. We've all heard the saying, "it takes a village," and that rings most true when it comes to the animation pipeline, because at every level of production, you will find artists who are at the the top of their craft, from character, background and prop design, to writers, storyboarders, layout artists, musicians, sound mixers, production coordinators, and so on and so forth. Each of these people leave an indelible mark on the projects they are a part of, and were any of them to be removed, it would change the end product. Yet most people don't see or can't even fathom such a concept because these people aren't the ones on stage at conventions and being interviewed. I'm sure by now you have an idea where this is going. Ever since the tide turned against Steven Universe, an unprecedented level of vitriolic hate has been leveled against the show's creator, Rebecca Sugar, where people have pointed the blame towards them for every writing choice someone disagrees with and every frame where the characters aren't exactly on model. Any issue with the show's production or even its release schedule has been pinned on Rebecca based off easily disprovable misinformation like how they draw all the keyframes, which stems from them in interviews talking about how they like to occasionally draw key poses for significant scenes, or will redo some drawings from the storyboards if a voice actor delivers a line in a way that doesn't quite match up. But those were instances where they had to find the time outside of their incredibly busy schedule of running the show, not one of their core responsibilities. Whether you like Steven Universe or not, a single person is not responsible for every gripe you had with over 160 episodes of television, and acting otherwise is pure delusion. Rebecca, as the creator, obviously had a huge hand in crafting the show and the direction it took, but it was also a massive group effort, with every member of the crew putting a piece of themselves into this project. After all, the reason any of this happened is because Rebecca was able to put so much of themselves into Adventure Time.
I wish I could talk to you right now one-on-one and hear what little things stuck out to you, which pun you found hidden on a background, which specific character moment struck you because you had never seen it in a cartoon before, which line became something you quote with friends, or which song got stuck in your head, so I could tell you exactly who drew it, who pitched it, who wrote it, or who sang it, and why it could have only come from them and no one else.
There is so much that goes into the production of an animated series that most people will never see or even consider. For instance, there's an incredibly brief moment in the episode Cheeseburger Backpack where Pearl projects an image of various gems at the Sea Spire. For that short moment, every single gem in the projection had to be fully designed by Rebecca, Colin Howard, and Angie Wang, even though we would never see them in the show proper beyond these heavily simplified abstractions. The levels of communication and planning it takes to pull something like this off is astoundingly impressive, especially in later years where everything had to be much tighter to accommodate the show's complex and sprawling narrative.
I think the writers' retreats we've peppered throughout the show's lifetime have been particularly important lately, because as episodes have taken on a stronger continuity, improvisation or reimagining at the storyboard stage gets harder to pull off. Other episodes down the line may require that an earlier episode stick to the outline tighter to hit specific story beats. The retreats have allowed the board artists to give their thoughts at an earlier stage on longer story arcs, so we can adjust before locking things down from a macro season perspective.
And now it's time to talk about the arguably biggest source of ammunition the Steven Universe critical community had at their disposal, the animation and art direction. Which is honestly hilarious because, as I discussed earlier, the crew had always been anticipating this from before the show premiered. Like, come on guys, y'all couldn't have been a little less predictable? While Steven Universe's look was a point of contention from the beginning, it wasn't until the later years that it became one of the show's most persistent criticisms. Particularly how they play fast and loose in terms of how the characters are drawn, with people doing perfectly healthy things like cherry-picking screenshots from random episodes to theorize Peridot was shrinking, to complaining about how big a character's hair was. Many people decided this meant the crew were bad and lazy artists, when a simple bit of research would tell you this element was not a bug, but a feature. An intentional choice made to further allow each storyboarder to leave their own mark on the show, similar to old Warner Brothers cartoons where every animator had their own way of drawing Bugs Bunny.
I wanted the designs to have these visual benchmarks, especially for the people who are going to work on the show, so that even if they draw them differently, you'd still know it's that character. I was trying to get them all to look like who they were in a way that would then be flexible.
The fluidity of the character models is also a way to stay true to the artistic aim of injecting the series with a toon attitude, so the models can be changed or exaggerated to fit the tone of a scene or punctuate a joke. This emphasis on the show embracing its cartoony nature can be little details like using hair to emphasize a character's emotions, or can have an influence on the lore. A prime example being the idea of gems having the ability to shapeshift, which is inspired by this idea of taking a staple of classic animation and turning it into a superpower. And from my perspective, I have always loved these choices. Seeing each border's style come through in the drawings simply reinforces that this is the creation of human beings, a living, breathing work of art, and its occasional roughness is part of that. Now, of course, you are still free to dislike how the show looks and disagree with its creative decisions. Art is subjective after all, but you should also acknowledge there is clear intention behind every facet of the direction, and nothing here is the result of laziness or oversight. Steven Universe is not a space opera fantasy. That's only part of what this show was designed to be. It's a subversion of typical fantasy where, while our characters do save the world and fight interstellar threats, it's also about exploring what it means to be human, and that includes the characters often living relatively domestic lives. This is where the townies come into play. In between its grand narrative reveals, Steven Universe spends a lot of its time exploring its primary location of Beach City, getting to know its citizens and delving into their own dreams, fears, and interpersonal relationships. Aside from making the series more inclusive by allowing the writers to depict their own culture, families, and experiences, many of which have received very little representation in the past, keeping Beach City in the focus means we don't lose touch with Steven's human side. As mentioned, Steven's greatest power is simply being human, having the ability to change and grow and learn how to better connect with others, so it is crucial that he views the mundane everyday life experiences as just as fascinating as the magical gem stuff.
I think that thesis, grounding the series in family and simple everyday pleasures, really eliminated any impulse to inject cynicism or snarkiness into the series. There's nothing in the show that Steven would be dismissive of. Everything was going to be exciting for him to experience.
However, these townie episodes were a big source of negativity within the fandom, with many complaining about their mere existence, saying they were getting in the way of the story and labeling them as filler. Now, filler in its modern, redefined context refers to episodes of a TV show that leave no impact and could be removed without negatively affecting the end product. That is not what townie episodes are. The human characters are an essential part of the show because they are what give the grander narrative personal stakes. Steven Universe, at times, is a show where the fate of the world hangs in the balance, but we as people can often have a difficult time wrapping our heads around the concept of the entirety of the Earth being destroyed. So writers will often mix that in by focusing on the emotional implications that would have, which is where Beach City comes in as a microcosm of the planet that our main characters are fighting to save. You obviously care about the idea of the world ending, but the smaller implications of what that means for the characters we know is where our investment lies. Because if the diamonds win and the Earth is converted into a gem colony or torn apart by the cluster, that means the lives of these people we've come to know will end. It means Sadie doesn't get to understand her own self-worth and continue finding herself through music. It means Petey doesn't get to open his own restaurant and follow his dreams. It means Lars can't get over his deep insecurities and learn to be authentic with others. That is what the crystal gems are fighting to protect, so the show has to spend extended amounts of time with these characters so when things do get serious, you care about the potential impact. That is why the abduction arc at the end of season 4 is so suspenseful. Had the townies been characters who occasionally appeared in the background with a few lines and a reoccurring joke, sure, you'd feel bad for Steven in these episodes, but because of how much time you've spent with them, you feel the desperation and fear when these people suddenly start disappearing. A moment like this only works this well because we've gotten to know who Jamie is and we care about what happens to him. And the apex of this is the story of Lars. One of the first characters Rebecca created for the show, Lars is introduced as a typical angst-filled teen who acts apathetic towards most things and is a huge jerk. At the start of the show, he is a foil to Steven, the antithesis of our earnest hero. Then as the show goes on, Lars gets more episodes focused on chipping away at this facade, showing his desire for social acceptance that causes him to portray an inauthentic version of himself. Now, he still has a copious amount of other flaws, especially his callous treatment of Sadie, which also gets unpacked over time. This builds to the episode The Good Lars, written by Colin Howard and Jeff Liu, in which Lars, Steven and Sadie are invited to a casual potluck hosted by the designated cool kids. Lars decides to make an ube roll, a purple yam dish that originates from Filipino culture. However, he panics over everyone judging him for his love of baking and never makes it to the potluck, throwing his dish away. His desertion of his dessert is what leads to him getting captured by Topaz and Aquamarine, and when Steven tries to free everyone and Sadie ends up in trouble, Lars runs away and hides, meaning he never gets off the ship. And in the season 5 premiere Stuck Together, as Steven is being taken to Homeworld, Lars is discovered and the two are trapped, leading to this beautiful moment where Lars opens up about his feelings of worthlessness and Steven admits how scared he is, solidifying their up till now tumultuous friendship. Later, when Steven and Lars escape from the diamonds, they land in an old kindergarten and stumble across a group of defective gems who have to live in hiding out of fear for their lives since they don't fit into the rigid mold of Homeworld. The off-colors hide the pair from Robinoid scanners until they are found. However, they soon realize Lars is essentially invisible due to his lack of a gem. To save his new friends, Lars puts himself in harm's way, battling off the machines by himself.
Eat
Lars dies in this absolutely devastating sequence drawn by Jeff Liu before Steven's healing powers are able to mostly revive him. In a culmination of everything his character has been through, Lars is essentially reborn, and none of it would have worked had we not had so many episodes developing Lars over the first 4 seasons. The character of Lapis is one of the most integral when it comes to the big picture of Steven Universe. Lapis is the first non-crystal gem we meet that isn't corrupted and serves as a gateway to learning about Homeworld and deepening our understanding of the gems, while also making Steven reconsider a lot of what he knows at this point. Over the next couple of years, Lapis would become the show's most problematic character in the eyes of many, and while I do agree there are significant problems with how Lapis was handled, the issue people took with her was her arc as a victim of abuse and how she wasn't perfect. The season 1 finale is capped off by an intense moment where Lapis is caught by Jasper, who wants to fuse so she can destroy the crystal gems, where Lapis seemingly agrees only to turn the tables and use the fusion to trap both Jasper and her at the bottom of the sea.
I'm done being everyone's prisoner. Now you're my prisoner, and I'm never letting you go!
It takes Steven and the gems all of season 2 to find Malachi, and in the season 3 premiere, the pair are finally separated. Now having nowhere else to go, Lapis accepts Steven's offer to stay on Earth, though is still reeling from this whole experience and struggling with the trauma it has left her, becoming jaded as a result. This leads into the incredible season 3 outing, Alone at Sea, written by Hilary Florido, Kat Morris, and Rebecca Sugar, where Steven and Greg take Lapis out into the water to try and help her heal so she doesn't lose that part of herself. When something below the water stops the boat's rudder, Lapis apologizes for ruining the day, saying she can't move on from what happened.
But it's not like that anymore. You don't have to be with Jasper.
That's not it. I miss her.
What?
We refused for so long.
But she's terrible.
I'm terrible. I did horrible things. I broke your dad's leg. I stole Earth's ocean. Go on. Tell me I'm wrong.
Jasper climbs onto the boat, revealing she's been following Lapis and attempts to coerce her into fusing again due to her obsession with power, which stems from her own deep-seated self-loathing issues as another gem formed on Earth.
I was terrible to you. I liked taking everything out on you. I needed to. I hated you. It was bad.
It'll be better this time. I've changed. You've changed me.
This moment is what truly turned people against Lapis, stating that she was just as bad as Jasper, which is a statement that ignores all the previous context we've been given. Lapis was imprisoned in a mirror for thousands of years, interrogated by Homeworld who believe she was a crystal gem, and left behind in the aftermath of the war. Steven is the first person to ever help Lapis, freeing her from the mirror and healing her so she can return home, only to immediately be imprisoned again and brought back to Earth by Jasper and Peridot. By this point, Lapis has given up any hope of escape and sees all of this as her fault. The only thing she wants to do is protect Steven. Just look at how she reacts when the ship starts crashing to Earth. Then immediately once Lapis emerges from the wreckage, she is grabbed by Jasper, who attempts to manipulate her into fusing for the sole purpose of killing the only person to have ever cared about her. So Lapis agrees to fuse before turning it on Jasper to trap her at the bottom of the ocean in order to save Steven. After centuries of being used as a tool, Lapis in desperation sees an opportunity to take control of the situation and have it be her own choice, so she takes it, regaining some of the power in this dynamic and taking out her anger on Jasper only to realize she enjoys it, because this is a mutually toxic relationship which is directly pointed out once they've disappeared into the ocean.
Yikes. They are really bad for each other.
And while many latched onto this moment from Alone at Sea as proof Lapis is truly reprehensible because she enjoyed getting revenge on the person who imprisoned her, made her give up on herself, and has threatened to kill the first person to show kindness towards her on multiple occasions, they pretty much ignored what happens next.
No!
What?
What we had wasn't healthy. I never want to feel like I felt with you. Never again.
In this moment, Lapis breaks the cycle. She's the one trying to escape this toxic relationship that Jasper is doing everything to continue. Jasper is the one who stalks her, the one who keeps grabbing her every time she tries to get away, the one who attempts to manipulate Lapis by saying she's changed. They were both bad for each other and caused the other pain, but Lapis recognizes and rejects this pattern, while Jasper becomes immediately violent and, again, tries to kill the person Lapis loves most. I will state again, Lapis has problems when it comes to how she is written, mainly how she does do a lot of careless things, which isn't a problem in itself, obviously, but she is never given the chance to fully apologise. Like how her and Peridot don't get to discuss Lapis leaving and taking the barn with her because they're in the middle of the diamond fight where both of them get destabilised. However, those issues are often glossed over because people were too busy demonising a person with PTSD who survived centuries of endless suffering and abuse because she didn't come out of it with Cinderella levels of warmth and compassion. Now we're getting to the really good stuff. One of the most notable things about the storytelling in Steven Universe is how the show implements a Steven-only perspective, meaning we see everything in the show strictly from his point of view. We learn about the history of the gems and the war at the same pace he does, which is meant to ensure each new reveal is meaningful for both the audience and the characters, so that the viewers have time to appreciate each new idea that gets introduced. This is an implementation of a technique known as sublime art, which refers to this idea that when a person looks at a picture, they are aware that there is something more going on outside of the frame. So rather than immediately understanding the meaning behind the art, you feel there's something more important beyond the borders which you can't see. It is human nature for us to fear the unknown, and thus the understanding that what you see is merely part of a bigger picture is quite unsettling. The Steven-only perspective was one of the core rules from the very beginning of production, designed to help the show stay focused and keep new reveals exciting. Though since it's in a section where I talk about the problems people had with the show, you know where this is going. Detractors saw this unique method of storytelling and viewed it as an arbitrary restriction that limited the potential of the series due to the fact it meant we can only learn more about other characters when Steven is in the room with them. Though from where I stand, I love this aspect of the show and think it strengthens the pacing of the story as well as the core themes. Like I talked about in my section on Steven, when the series starts we view the gems how he sees them. Cool magical heroes who fight to protect protect the planet. But the more time he, and by extension the viewer, spends with Garnet, Amethyst and Pearl, they start to see the gems for who they really are, with all their personal baggage and insecurities, and understand them as complicated individuals. Because we view the world through Steven's eyes, as he grows more emotionally mature, we see the world itself change and become far more complex and layered. So when Steven learns or discovers something new about himself, the gems, or anything, he takes time to process and understand it, which then allows us to see how this experience influences his actions and behaviour moving forward, whether in positive or destructive ways. That is precisely why each new concept will have an entire episode dedicated to it.
My favorite thing was when we were watching the work print for Marble Madness, when the gems were entering the kindergarten with the Robinoid. Ben and Matt were there and they were joking, what even is this show? Every single thing on screen had been set up in previous episodes. Peridot, Robinoids, the kindergarten. If you came in blind, you'd be so confused. You're just living in this place and it makes sense to you, because you spent time there. You've gained an understanding. I love that. I want kids to feel really smart.
The major complaint about the Steven-only perspective was that it meant everything was revealed at a slow rate, mainly the conflict with the diamonds, as at the start of the series, Steven has no idea who they are, which is the point. The diamonds and Homeworld are this terrifying mystery the show slowly builds up to, where we only catch brief glimpses of them, which is not only a way to stop the celebrity voice actors from destroying the show's budget, but preserve the suspense of this gradual build-up. It goes back to the whole sublime art thing, where you know the diamonds are out there somewhere planning the destruction of Earth, but because you never see that, it instills a fear in you, and you're on the edge of your seat waiting for the moment Steven comes face to face with them, because you know that's when shit hits the fan. That's why the zoo arc is so incredibly stressful, because it starts with our introduction to Blue Diamond and ends with Steven trapped in this room with them where he has to stay hidden. If the magical world to Steven represents the adult world, then the diamonds are taxes, because they're something you're vaguely aware of but have no idea how to deal with and dread the day you inevitably have to face them. I think that metaphor makes sense. Had the diamonds been introduced early in season 1 and we were given a massive exposition dump about the Gem War, what Homeworld is, and everything about Pink Diamond, the show would be infinitely less engaging. But instead, when you spend the whole of season 1 in the dark until Jasper casually name drops Yellow Diamond, then in season 2 we start learning more about them through Peridot and seeing abstract murals of them in the background, you get this sense of their immense power, so when you get to the full introduction of Yellow Diamond at the end of season 2, it leaves such an impact because there was intrigue. And it's not only the diamonds. Almost all of the show hinges on everything being anchored to Steven. The reveal of Garnet being a fusion is another fantastic example, where you see from the beginning Garnet has 2 gems, but you learn about fusion after you meet Garnet, and start to question if maybe she is a fusion. And you think that to a point where that twist is now so glaringly obvious that you start to second guess yourself. Then after Garnet has been destabilized, we meet Ruby and Sapphire, who bear some striking similarities, but by this point the idea of Garnet being a fusion is so far from your minds that it completely catches you off guard when...
Steven! Thank you!
Garnet! You're a fusion?
One of the show's defining and celebrated moments would not have been possible without the Steven-only perspective, and it adds so many layers to previous Garnet moments. If the show was told from a third-person narrative where you could cut to different characters constantly, all that would accomplish is giving the audience information Steven is unaware of. So rather than an exciting mystery where you feel connected with the characters because you're putting all the pieces together at the same time, it becomes an exercise in tedium while you wait for the characters to get caught up on information only you are privy to, disconnecting you from the emotion of the story. You all knew we'd have to cover this one sooner or later. One of the more notable things about the public reaction to Steven Universe after its ending was the reframing, and by that I mean complete demonization, of Rose Quartz following the Pink Diamond reveal. This was very much the tipping point of the show's gradual evolution of Rose from this almost angelic presence that hangs over the main characters to a more complex person, which is simply a reaction to Steven learning more about his late mother. At the start of the series, Steven's only feelings about Rose stem from what the gems and Greg tell him, painting Rose as this perfect, compassionate being, a healing presence and a great leader. With how she's talked about and held on such a high pedestal, she becomes more of an idea than a person. But when Steven learns about her from other sources with less bias, we see that that idea of Rose is not reflective of who she was, because in reality, she was just as flawed as anyone else. And it was incredibly interesting watching these notions of Rose get unraveled as both Steven and the audience have to question if this changes the way she is perceived. It's the same way kids have to learn to view their parents as they get older, discovering their complexities in a way they hadn't been able to grasp before. Rose's presentation is also indicative of a theme that is central to the show, that the gems are far more human than they realise, and are just as capable of emotional growth as well as making mistakes. However, because we as an audience viewed all of this in reverse, it painted a far more negative picture of Rose, which was always going to be the case. So rather than seeing a redemption story told in a non-chronological order, many perceived the big reveal of Rose once being Pink Diamond as pulling off the mask to reveal her true nature, stamping her as manipulative, selfish, and cruel, which while she does have those tendencies, as does anyone, she learned to move beyond that. While living as Pink Diamond, Rose, very much like Peridot, was raised on Homeworld's propaganda and wasn't offered an alternative viewpoint. She was the littlest of the diamonds and thus did not receive anywhere near the same amount of respect. Though because she wasn't trusted with any true responsibilities outside of essentially being a palace jester, she was able to form more meaningful connections with other creatures such as the Pebbles. However, Pink still desired to be treated on a similar level of importance as the other diamonds, wanting their own planet. That is why late season 5 draws so many connections between Steven and his mother, because their stories contain many parallels. Rose saw operating a colony as the adult world, and wanted to prove herself to the other diamonds, just like Steven's attitude to going on missions at the start of the series, where neither of them understood the wider implications of what they wanted. Though unlike Steven, who has a loving and supportive family, Rose was part of a system that functioned on logic rather than emotion. Thus, any attempts to change or prove herself were met with harsh punishment and pain, until one day she was finally trusted with her own planet, Earth. Which brings us to the final Rose flashback episode, Season 5, Episode 19, Now We're Only Falling Apart, bordered by Lamar Abrams and Christine Liu. Rose was ecstatic to finally have some real responsibility, only to find it rather boring because she's not even allowed to visit the planet's surface. When the first soldiers emerge from the kindergarten, Pearl has the idea for her to shapeshift into a quartz so she can be there, and she is elated to fit in and not be treated like a diamond for once.
Thank you so much for talking me into this. I couldn't have done this on my own.
Afterwards, the two decide to take some time to explore Earth, initially starting as a chance to have a break from her responsibility, but soon Rose fell in love with the planet's natural beauty and its current inhabitants. When her and Pearl return to the kindergarten, Rose finally understands what the diamonds are really doing when they colonize a new planet.
All this life that's been growing wild here on Earth, none of it will survive my invasion. We're not creating life from nothing. We're taking life and leaving nothing behind.
She tried to use her power as a diamond to stop the destruction of Earth, but the others refused to listen because they still didn't respect her or value her opinion. That is when she began fighting back as Rose, wanting to scare every gem off the planet, at least until she saw Garnet's fusion and realized Earth has the power to change other gems as well. And this is where Pearl truly fell in love with Rose.
I've been imagining things, even when you haven't asked me to. I imagined that I ran away and met you here on Earth. A Rose Quartz. And I'm not yours, but I make you so happy anyway. Isn't that ridiculous? Tell me to stop.
Please don't ever stop.
People saw this as some kind of twisted manipulation, ignoring what this moment means for both Pearl and Rose. This is Pearl essentially breaking free of her programming. She's having her own thoughts and feelings without prompt and is becoming her own person. And Rose is positively jubilant over this because she now realizes that is what she wants. For all gems to be freed from their oppression and form their own identities outside of their factory intended purpose. She literally has stars in her eyes eyes, something that only happens in this show when a character experiences true, earnest joy.
And maybe she was foolish, and maybe even selfish, but she was...
Following us.
What?
This whole time we thought we were following her, but she was following us.
This was never about Rose truly, because she only did all of this because of how much Pearl inspired her. Rose does everything for others because she can't do anything for herself. An earlier episode in Season 5, Your Mother and Mine, sees Garnet telling the Off-Colors the story of Rose Quartz to deprogram them from Homeworld's propaganda. Following the Pink Diamond reveal, many now saw this episode as entirely pointless in the grand scheme of things because it no longer impacted the story, ignoring what it has to say about Rose in hindsight. Every story Garnet tells is merely a fabrication that was made by Rose, where she creates this clear distinction between her past and current behaviour. The message here, when you add in the later context, is that Rose is her own worst enemy and never stops hating herself for her past. She swears Pearl to secrecy after faking her shattering, not out of some sort of malice, but because she doesn't want Pink Diamond to exist anymore, not even in mention.
For my last order to you as a diamond, please, let's never speak of this again.
Despite her being incredibly loving and wanting to help others, deep down she believes that she is incapable of such a thing. This acts as a shadow to what Steven is going through in the present day, questioning his own identity and putting all this energy into other people rather than himself. Had Rose allowed herself to be more honest with her loved ones, she'd be surprised how understanding they would be, but she never got to learn that because she can't accept herself. That is the tragedy of Rose Quartz, someone who tried to be a hero and save everyone, but because of their own self-loathing and refusal to be open with others, she failed and hurt a lot of people. What so many people miss about Rose is that she was a character who wanted to do better, but because of her self-sabotage, she could never be better. The closest she got to achieving that was when she met Greg, who also left an unsupportive home, changed his name, and essentially reinvented himself, just like Rose. The major difference being one ended up starting an interstellar war, the other ended up a struggling musician living in his van. Yet despite that, he gets the happy ending. Greg is able to find the fulfillment and peace within himself that Rose can't. Their relationship starts on a whim where they both find this novelty in each other, but they lack any sort of deeper foundation because Rose truly cannot connect with Greg, until he challenges her to treat him like an equal, something no one had ever done before. This allows Rose to open up to Greg in a way she hadn't been able to with anyone else. However, there is a clear reason for that. Greg doesn't know anything about or care to learn anything about her past. All he cares about is who she is in the present moment. Greg becomes the only person Rose doesn't have to hide from and can be her authentic self around, which is why Greg is the only character who pretty much has no reaction to learning the truth.
I fell in love with Rose Quartz, and she fell in love with Mr. Universe. Sure, she never told me she used to be Pink Diamond, but I never told her I used to be Gregory DeMayo.
Though there is a flip side to this where the two end up enabling each other. Since neither of them are willing to question the other about who they used to be, they both get to continue running from their past instead of confronting it, continuing to be rather immature and self-destructive. Which brings us to her decision to have Steven, which is simultaneously selfish and selfless. Because Rose's love of Greg was real, and she wanted to create a new life that would be able to grow in a way she thought she wasn't able to. Everything she says to Steven on that tape is real, but it is also the ultimate way to escape her problems and never deal with the consequences. Though I think there is also a third side to this. Remember what Rose said when talking about using a planet's resources to create gems?
Look at this, Pearl. We're creating life from nothing.
In Rose's mind, giving up her physical form to birth Steven, a human, is just that. Creating life from nothing. Because that's what she sees herself as. Rose is an immensely tragic character with a devastating ending where she never finds peace within herself and never got to become the person she wanted to be. And so much of the show's viewers have missed the point entirely, labeling her as the true villain of the series as though we were unmasking her like a Scooby-Doo character, ignoring all the nuance to her story. Oh boy, if the last section didn't already put me on several people's hit list, this one certainly will. It's time to discuss the ending of the original series, Steven's Princess Gauntlet that has him fully lose his sense of self, and the controversial resolution of the show's primary antagonists. Following the pink diamond reveal, Garnet's separation, then wedding, and a diamond fight which ends with Steven using his mind powers to tell them the truth about Pink shattering, the entire crew makes their way to Homeworld in the hopes of finding a way to heal all the corrupted gems on Earth. Though through trying to fully assimilate into Homeworld society, a place with no humanity, in order to try and appease White Diamond, the lines between Steven, Rose, and Pink Diamond become increasingly blurred. The Diamonds were introduced as cold, unfeeling rulers of an authoritarian state, but here they are revealed to be part of Steven's family, a profoundly dysfunctional family perpetuating a cycle of abuse that originates from White Diamond. This is where the song Familiar from the episode of the same name comes into play. In this sequence, drawn by Kat Morris, Steven realizes how he's kind of been in this position before, being the youngest and most underestimated of a powerful group only to understand the rest of the family have deep emotional scars. The major difference being the lack of emotion and open love, which gives Steven his plan of attack, so to speak. Use his humanity to heal the Diamonds like he did the Crystal Gems, then take advantage of that new connection to stop them from colonizing other planets. Because we need to make one thing clear, Steven is not here to befriend the Diamonds. He is here to appeal to their familial connection in order to save Earth and all gems. It is the ultimate example of what Steven has been doing for the past 4 seasons, putting aside his own feelings for the sake of everyone else. Steven Universe has always worn its influences on its sleeve, one of which being classic Disney animated fairy tales, which was all to build up to this final arc where it becomes this contrast between this place that's stuck in the past and our characters who live in the present. The Diamonds themselves are based on outdated cliches from older stories, with White being the wicked stepmother and Yellow and Blue filling in the role of the evil stepsisters. And Pink is a character that aesthetically fits many of the old Disney princess tropes. It's very much a commentary on the rigid structure of Homeworld, where each gem has a specific role to play and will be punished in deviating from that. But Steven doesn't belong in that world because he is something entirely new, which perplexes the Diamonds. When Steven brings the surprise element of humanity into this equation, the Diamonds lack the ability to understand him, which is what eventually leads to the Empire's downfall. All because they can't wrap their head around Steven wanting to be treated as his own person. This is what the crew dubbed the Princess Gauntlet that Steven has to go through, which takes inspiration from many classic princess stories. He's lived away in a cottage with his 3 magical guardians to eventually return to his kingdom, has mice make his clothes, and gets locked in a tower. These tropes relate to the overall point of being forced to be someone you're not, where the longer Steven stays in this role of Pink Diamond, the more he is gaslit into losing his identity to this system. I've mentioned throughout this discussion how even when the answers are given to him time and time again, Steven still doubts whether or not he is his own person or just another version of Rose. These feelings, which he has mostly kept bottled up, are now manifesting in violent and mentally draining ways where each trial of the Princess Gauntlet chips away at him until he's ready to believe anything he's told about himself, even when White tells him he never really existed. That is not helped by how uncomfortable this environment is making him because it goes against everything he knows. Homeworld is a place with no humanity, and so when designing how it would look, it couldn't simply be imperial in an earthly way. It needed to really show how out of place Steven was in this environment. So it was decided to have Homeworld's visuals be entirely emotionally driven, which sounds counterintuitive to the whole no humanity thing, but it means that the visual style is very abstract, a contrast from how literal everything on Earth is. And this is achieved by showcasing these dueling sides of Homeworld, that being the eras, a battle between the ancient and the modern. Homeworld is trying to disguise its broken self from the loss of Pink by burying its identity under cold, functional architecture. And the scary thing is, Homeworld is starting to reflect our reality, with things like colourful restaurants being redesigned into sterile environments that lack their old personality. The only thing stopping Steven from going over the edge is that he can still cling to his humanity. Thus, when Steven and Connie accidentally fuse at the ball, inadvertently inspiring other gems, Blue and Yellow are quick to repress Pink's influence before White casts judgment on them for it, because it falls on them to uphold White's unrealistic expectations for their perfect empire. So Yellow locks them in a tower, and Blue attempts to guilt him just like they did with Pink. But these old toxic patterns don't work on Steven because he knows he didn't do anything wrong and can't be manipulated because he wasn't conditioned like Rose was. His human side means Blue's powers of emotional manipulation have a very limited effect on him, allowing him to stand up for himself in a way his mother never could.
I know what it's like to have a loving family, and we don't do stuff like this to each other.
And it's his guiltless objection that finally gets through to Blue. Because here's the thing about an ideology that is entirely built around something being perfect. It only takes the smallest scratch for the whole thing to come crashing down.
I always thought that you were failing this world, but if you were happier on Earth, maybe this world was failing you.
And that idea is what breaks all the diamonds. When Yellow confronts Blue for helping Steven and Connie and they fight, Steven is able to convince her with the same tactic. The thing people forget is the diamonds are grieving, and have been so repressively for thousands of years. Steven gets through to them by appealing to that loss and showing how it could have easily been prevented had they been more willing to listen to each other.
If you try to make this empire perfect, if you just wipe away everything you see as flawed, you lose all the things that make you happy.
Which brings us to White Diamond, essentially the final boss of the original series and the one with the most mystery surrounding her. Though I will admit the rushed pacing of the final batch of episodes does leave something to be desired. Yellow, Blue and Pink had so much build up and were hinted at before full name drops and eventually seeing them in full. White's name is first mentioned in the same episode she appears in. However, I still think how the show handled her is worthy of discussion. White is used to represent outdated standards of beauty in society, and how it stifles and hurts people, even those who do fit the mold. As such, she has been designed with all the markers of femininity that to this point the crew had avoided with other female presenting characters. So she has long eyelashes, extremely detailed features like her ridiculous high heels and fingernails. A major influence of White Diamond as a character was from the Disney-produced animated short The Story of Menstruation, in particular this moment.
But don't let it get you down. After all, no matter how you feel, you have to live with people. You have to live with yourself, too. And once you stop feeling sorry for yourself and take those days in your stride, you'll find it's easier to keep smiling and even-tempered.
I wanted White Diamond to be that voice that tells you can't express yourself. That it would be unpleasant for you to burden other people with whatever is going wrong with you.
Though much like Homeworld's architecture, White is also hiding her own pain beneath a cold, unfeeling exterior. Because White is both all colours and the absence of colour, she believes herself to be every form of light, meaning she sees all gems as her and herself as all gems. As she represents old-fashioned, rigid standards of beauty, she holds herself, and by extension others, to a ridiculous level. Because when your entire sense of self is defined by appearance, one mistake can mean losing that. This means any gem that challenges Homeworld's structure is a threat to her authority, because if she's all gems, then that challenges the idea of herself. However, the brutal truth to White Diamond is that behind her powers of identity, the ability to control and manipulate others, she has no identity of her own. She cannot allow herself to feel anything, or it risks damaging her perfect image. That is why when Steven first meets her, she is acting so callous by simply referring to how others feel rather than herself.
Hello, Starlight. You certainly gave everyone a scare. They're all just thrilled to see you safe and sound.
This rejection of emotion puts White in direct opposition to Pink, who represents desire and impulse. Pink's power is bringing out a gem's hidden personality, which we see via Pearl. However, this isn't a diamond power, as it's more human, since it's an ability Steven is also shown to have, and explains how they are able to draw others towards them through their sincerity. After fighting their way up the Diamond Mecha, Steven and the gems essentially enter White's mind for their final confrontation, where she quickly takes control of Garnet, Amethyst and Pearl, insisting she's merely fixing their flaws.
It feels good, doesn't it, Pink? Dulling your power, hiding your face,
blaming everything on someone else. You became Rose Quartz to deceive your pathetic friends, and now you've improved on that because you're even deceiving yourself.
White has removed Steven from his home and taken away his support system, and now tells him he was never real, just another one of Pink Diamond's lies. One of the biggest questions the fandom had always had is, since Steven is half human, what would that mean if his form was destabilized? It was a question the writers joked about, but had never been addressed in the show proper because it was all to lead up to this. Steven wakes up to see White Diamond holding his gem as it starts to reform, first as Pink, then as Rose, and finally Steven, as the screen splits in two, showing us a literal Steven-only perspective. Without his gem and healing powers, Steven is slowly dying, while White is dumbfounded, questioning where Pink is.
She's gone.
What did you say? Answer me!
She's gone!
Steven has been split into his human and gem half, the major difference being the gem side lacking any emotion because it's missing the most essential part of Steven, his humanity, and so it slowly begins making its way towards its missing piece, effortlessly deflecting all of White's interventions until the two are reunited in this phenomenal piece of animation by the legendary James Baxter. One of the foundational pillars of the show the crew has had from the very beginning is that the simple joys of humanity can be just as engaging and surprising as the fantasy, which we've seen throughout. How Steven would treat both gem and human conflicts with equal value. How the things we admire most about the gems as characters are their very human attributes. How this show has always been grounded in those simple ideals of family, identity, and love. And all of that was building up to this, where the reveal that Steven is such a beautiful moment that goes back to the very early days of the series. I mean, the show's original tagline was "Believe in Steven." They were telling us this from the very beginning. It's the exact same tactic they used for Pink Diamond's reveal, or Garnet being a fusion, where its conclusion is so abundantly obvious that many people refuse to believe it. Even the show did try and subtly plant the seed to have us second guessing ourselves in the episode 3 Gems and a Baby, where all the gems have different theories about what Steven is, all of which needed to be set up as possibilities building to the reveal that Steven is a fusion with himself. And that is how he defeats White Diamond. By simply existing as himself, he proves her wrong, and if she's wrong about him, then she's wrong about herself, because again, she thinks that she is everyone, which finally knocks her off her pedestal and obliterates her perception of herself. Defeating the diamonds isn't about redeeming them, because he doesn't redeem, nor does he forgive them, as we see in the follow-up installments. Steven's showdown with White is a statement of individualism and integrity, and that is what the final moment of the show is about, with the song Change Your Mind. Steven doesn't need nor care about how the diamonds see him because he loves and respects himself, and if they want a relationship with him, they have to change. The original run of Steven Universe concluded on the 21st of January 2019, and was followed up by a time-skip movie and epilogue series tying up the loose ends and exploring the aftermath and consequences of everything Steven went through, which I'll maybe get around to talking about someday. The final installment of the franchise concluded almost 4 years ago, and things have been relatively silent ever since. Which isn't all too surprising, especially since right after Future ended, Cartoon Network's parent company Warner Bros. Has kind of been on a downward spiral where incompetent executives are bleeding the company dry and destroying a 100-year reputation like it's nothing. Especially with the recent closure of the Cartoon Network offices, the future is incredibly uncertain, though you can say that for pretty much any form of entertainment at the moment. So while I don't think we'll be seeing more for a while, these characters returning merely feels like an inevitability. I must admit, for so many years I have been utterly perplexed by the quite frankly volatile volatile backlash of Steven Universe's message and writing, but I think I've finally been able to understand where some of it's coming from. This realization stemmed from, quite frankly, the strangest place. Back in August, during the as aforementioned mental spiral while trying to upload my Owl House video, I randomly decided to check back in with a YouTube channel I haven't watched in years, Game Theory. In particular, I watched MatPat's video about the indie horror game My Friendly Neighborhood, because despite being the furthest thing from a fan of horror as possible, and there being no chance I would ever actually play the game, I was interested in the concept due to its Muppet inspiration. The game tells the story of a sort of alternate universe where Sesame Street never existed, and in its place is the show My Friendly Neighborhood, which was about teaching its audience how to be a good neighbor. But due to fallout from a 20-year war, much like in the real world, humanity became corrupted, selfish, and untrusting, which caused the message of My Friendly Neighborhood about being kind to others to receive backlash.
I am frightened by the tone of the morals of that show. Just yesterday, one of the characters said, "You always think of others before yourself, even when it's uncomfortable." But what if somebody takes advantage of you for doing that? What if doing what's uncomfortable ends up exposing you to hurt and danger? Is it really a good idea to teach children to be so reckless with their own well-being?
Of course, I'm not saying the people who dislike Steven Universe are corrupted or evil or anything of the sort, but I do see a correlation. A show that champions forgiveness and empathy is labelled as harmful and unrealistic by a world which has accepted that selfishness, revenge, and cruelty are simply how things work and feel threatened by anything that says differently. That's why redemption arcs are such a hot button issue, because it doesn't matter how much a character regrets their harmful actions and strives to be a better person when all people care about is if they feel said character was punished enough. And as much as I would love to sit here and say I have a solution, I'm afraid I don't have an answer to this, because we're talking about people's worldview, and a few pretty words in a YouTube video won't change that. I still love Steven Universe because I still believe in what it preaches. Every day I try to be a better person, treat people with kindness, and approach conflicts with understanding. And sometimes I get hurt by that. I trust the wrong person and allow myself to be treated as a doormat far more often than I probably should. It'd be so easy to give in to the constant harshness of the world, but I still keep trying. Because if we don't, how can we ever expect anything to get better?
I know we can't get everything right 100% of the time, but I hope that the core values of love and acceptance, not only for others but also yourself, resonate with our audience and radiate outwards to create a happier and safer future for the next generation. I know that's a lofty goal for a kids' cartoon, but why not?
I believe Steven Universe will always remain relevant and be discussed at length because I believe the world will always need a show like Steven Universe. There are so many forces on this planet that seek to stop people from living as their authentic selves, from powerful governments to random bigots on the street. It has and will continue to be a scary place for many of us. But we also have this special thing made by marginalized artists who got tired of not seeing themselves on screen and did something about it. They created something that speaks to those people and tells them you are not broken, you are not alone, and you deserve happiness and respect just like anyone else. And then they risked it all to take that message as far as they possibly could. It's not perfect, not by a long shot, but to me, that is what makes it so beautiful. Until next time, I've been the Gladding Gladiator, and I will always believe in Steven. As always, thank you tremendously to my Patreon patrons such as The Wacky Deli, Torai Matson, Blah6, Tune for Thought, and Toby Fangor. If you like what I do and want to help support the future of the channel, as well as gain access to videos early and some other fun perks, you can do so by becoming a Patreon member. Link can be found down below. You'll also see links to my amazing friends who helped me out massively by reading the various quotes from the Crewniverse throughout the video, along with links to other YouTubers I used footage from. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing and liking the video as it helps me out a bunch, and tell me down below your relationship with Steven Universe. Thanks so much for watching folks, and I'll see ya real soon.